President for few was Dorothy Nelms. She retired from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Dorothy served as national president from 1978 to 1980.
I think 75 turned out to be the turning year for big participation in national training programs. We told the hotel that we were expecting about 800, 900 people, and it turned out we had about 1,100 people. And the hotel was surprised, and so were we. That was our biggest training program to date in 1975. And that's when we started trying to offer a potpourri of training, instead of just focusing on those things that might be helpful to federal women's program managers and people in EO. We started expanding and saying, let's do something about personal enhancement, because that's a very important thing to women. How do we talk about developing those other aspects of ourselves that will make us more marketable as we move up? We also expanded into career development kinds of things. After you start getting more marketable, what are the things you can do with yourself to start moving up in the organization? And so we started offering a wide variety of training starting with 1975, which we've tried to continue in all the training programs since that time. Another thing I remember about 1975 is we engaged a banquet speaker. And her name was Florence Kennedy.
Oh.
And I don't know if any of you know Florence Kennedy. Florence Kennedy is a black woman attorney from New York who was famous for starting the Welfare Mothers organization. And she's very intelligent, very literate, but she could also speak very guttural and very dirty. And when I asked Flo to be the banquet speaker, I did it because we were on the cutting edge of the women's movement. So we had always been a kind of conservative organization, and everybody we chose to speak to us spoke the party line, you know. And they talked nice and soft and sweet, you know. And I said, well, Flo can kind of like upset them a little, but I'll ask her to calm down, you know. And so I talked with Flo, and I said, look, now this is, you know, white, middle-class women, honey, so chill. Don't talk your usual stuff. You know? So she says, oh, I can understand what you're talking about. Sure, So she arrives at the hotel in a jeans outfit and a sailor hat. And that told me right there, watch out. But she dressed for the banquet in a very nice evening dress. We provided a suite for her in the shore. And she came down and she was starting to make her speech. And I was sitting next to Mae Waterhouse at that time. And Florence Kennedy started talking with this very high, elevated tone about the injustices that have happened to women and how women have to start dealing with some of those injustices. And that is why we're having the women's movement. But you women better wake up out there and look up. And she pointed up, and everybody looks up, and she said, there's a big shit bag hanging over your head. Trying to figure out how I'm going to get up and tell the audience, you know, what had happened. And this little note was sticking out under my door, and I picked this little note up, and it was a note from one of the few members. And she said, I'm a little old maid, she said, from way down south. And she said, this is my first attendance at an FDW. She said, and when that woman started talking, she said, I was appalled. She said, I just started to get up, but I was too paralyzed. She said, but then I started listening to her. She said, and it was like a light bulb went off in my head. She said, and I saw my whole repressed life. She said, I saw women repressed and held back. And she said, and I finally understood what that man meant when he said, don't let the medium destroy the message. And she said, and I heard that message, and I want to thank you for letting that happen to me in my life. And I said, hey, I can do anything now. If anybody feels that good about something, I still get chills when I've kept her letter. And every time I feel kind of discouraged, I read that letter from that woman. And so when I spoke next morning, I think mine was to the effect that sometimes we do have to listen to people with different opinions. Sometimes we do have to hear people say things in a way that we might not say them ourselves. But as that woman said, let's listen to the message. And few does not necessarily endorse everything she said. She was a guest of few. And if we could predict what was going to come out of everybody's mouth, that would be great. But we can't always do that. We owed her courtesy. We gave her courtesy. She was our speaker. Formulate your own opinions about what she said. And that's what you're supposed to do. Anyway, that was 1975, the big highlight. How I ever got to be president after that, I'll never know. But anyway, 1978, I also remember because we had a semi-annual board meeting in El Paso, Texas. I don't know if Mae Waterhouse remembers this, but I was halfway through my first year in law school and working full-time. And I talked to Mae about, we had talked once about my running for president. And I told Mae, I said, I just don't think I can do it because I'm going to continue in law school. And I'm working, and my boss has just told me that it just can't interfere with the job. I said, the pressure's too much. I don't think I can run for president. And I started crying, and I said, May, I wanted that so bad. And she says, well, Dorothy, you'll get another chance someday. She was so sympathetic. Anyway, I cleared my eyes up and I went back. Anyway, it was only a few weeks later that I had a chance to take early retirement from HUD. And I took early retirement. I said, boom, boom, FEW, here I come. And so I continued in law school and continued to be president of FD. I was elected president and was installed right here in Denver, Colorado in 1978 at the National Training Program, Few Can Climb Mountains. Now, that's how I got in office. Now, let's see what happened after I got in office. I'm going to see if I can remember some of the highlights just to tell you. I got to cross off these things. One, something May started that culminated when I was president was a reception for all the former first ladies of the country. And so we had a reception, and we had Mrs. Ford came, Mrs. Nixon sent a representative, Mrs. Linda Robb came for her mother. The wife of the vice president came. Mondale's wife came. It was a beautiful reception. We had it up on Capitol Hill. We had a long receiving line, and we were so honored that the first ladies had come to be at our reception. So we had that. We had another one in a subsequent year, but that was started while May was president. It culminated while I was president. We had the first full-time lobbyist hired while I was president. That was Lynn Revo Cohen. We hired her in late 1978. We'd always done lobbying in this organization, but we'd always done it on a volunteer basis, and kind of like, who can we muster up to get to go to the Hill on this issue, you know? And it kind of gave us a lack of continuity and a lack of visibility in terms of the Hill. And so with the hiring and the continuing of a full-time person to work on legislation, we've gotten a real focus on legislation in this organization and a lot of visibility on Capitol Hill and a lot of credibility with our membership, with our function in the legislative area. Playboy magazine to put this big publicity out that they were coming to interview women in the federal government to get some potential for their November issue. And they had this big thing all splayed out in the papers, you know, and we decided, how dare they exploit government women like that? So we got a string of women, and we made sure we got very attractive women to go over here and form a picket line at the hotel where they were going to have the interviews for Playboy magazine and protest that they were exploiting the sexuality of government women, that government women didn't want to be involved in this. And we made sure they couldn't say it's only sour apples because look at how funny looking they are. We got women that were very attractive. We got more publicity out of that than any other intelligent undertaking we had done. Just against them. Another thing we did that got us a lot of publicity, which we've still continued, was we formed the first big coalition as the head of the coalition of other women's organizations. And that was our coalition to modify veterans' preference. We were having a lot of rift situations in the federal government. A lot of women were being riffed who were being ripped because they didn't have that 5-point veterans preference. And so our initiative was to have Congress make some change in how long a veteran could continue to use 5-point preference. We also started meeting monthly with the White House, all the national presidents of women's organizations. And that was the most wonderful thing for me. I was at first the only black woman. And one woman asked me one day, she said, what do you belong to? I said, FEW. She said, oh, I didn't know that was a black organization. Oh, she said, no, shut up. No, it's not. One of the things that came out of that White House meeting was getting to know Sarah Weddington, who was the attorney on the Roe versus Wade. She was an assistant to President Carter, and she was very instrumental in getting us, all the presidents, to go on a trip to all the military installations in the Washington area to try to find out the status of women in the military. And we all went on Air Force One, the president's jet, and flew down to Langley Air Force Base, Norfolk Naval Base, Fort Eustis, Virginia, when the VIP officers' quarters, climbing up and down the little things on ships, and we had the greatest 3-day tour of military, talking to military women and men about their perception of women in the military. And we made a great report on that. That was Kathleen Carpenter, who was an assistant secretary in the Defense Department at that time. And I only have one other thing to say. Sexual harassment also became a big thing while I was president. It was in 1978 that Congressman Hanley had his first congressional investigation of sexual harassment, and I testified before Congress on the impact of sexual harassment for women in the federal government, and that was the beginning of the first study by the Merit Persistence Protection Board and further emphasis on trying to eradicate sexual harassment. Those were two of the greatest years of my life. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you.